Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and this is Sabbath Collective, a community of people interested in pursuing the Sabbath and celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of the Bible. We're beginning a series on relationships, the ties that bind, where over the next several weeks we're going to explore friendships, families, romantic relationships, and communities. Most recently, I watched the movie Get Out. I don't know if you saw it or not, but I found myself forgetting the title and yelling Get Out during the whole movie. But it was actually written and directed by a brilliant gentleman who portrayed powerful insights, images, and metaphors in this movie. It was successful in so many ways, financially, the number of people who saw it, critical acclaim. And then, interestingly enough, a voice of opposition came up concerning using an actor who wasn't from the U.S. And instead of putting local actors to work, this voice felt that this movie was remiss in using an outside actor. And this was a sad distraction. Another example, in the same week that I saw, I was reading a brilliant post from a young man addressing xenophobia in his workplace. And that was met with a celebrity's response saying women in the workplace have suffered this for years and they are the real victims here. And that took the comments in a whole different direction. Have you noticed a pattern of having so many awful things tearing at the fabric of our world that we're being divided on what to mend first? And this difference in urgent priorities is a diversion. And it is literally tearing apart friendships, families, and communities. It's a battle tactic, and it's as old as time. Dividing and destroying relationships is a strategy that effectively works to weaken the opposition. So if hate strategy is to destroy relationships, it's because of the great threat that relationships pose. We must resist by building and strengthening our meaningful relationships with ties that bind. The Mishnah is a collection that is said to supplement and clarify the commandments. Now, the Mishnah is not the Bible. It's extra biblical writings by wise and studious ancient Jewish teachers, passed through the generations, and it's for the purpose of instructing followers of Yahweh how to live out of his instructions. There's practical wisdom here. And speaking of relationships, the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot 1:6, says, make for yourself a rabbi, acquire for yourself a friend, and judge every person as meritorious. Now, these are three relational instructions. As much as I would love to look at everyone needs a rabbi, and also thinking of others' value as well, let's drill down on number 2. Acquire for yourself a friend. We all need to have friends. We know this. This is not groundbreaking revelation here. We are designed with the need for relationship, for connection. But the Mishnah looks at the purpose for a friend a bit differently than our Greek Western culture does today. In our Western world, we're attracted to people as friends based on our commonalities. We may like the same music or literature or sports teams, or maybe we're into the same craft beer, or we work out at the same gym. It's based on common interests. And the friend fills a need in my life. So I'll have someone to go to a new restaurant with, or take a run with, or travel with. It's a person who you relate to on some surface level. And it's actually fine to have people like that. People are a social comfortability. I think I just made that word up. But often, when the commonality ends, so does the friendship. Now, you may call these kinds of friends outer circle friends. The rabbinic text here is speaking about inner circle friends. And we all know there's outer and inner circle friends. Inner circle friends are friends with a purpose. It's not just the common interests, but also the areas in which we don't see eye to eye that offer us the most room to grow and provide us with the opportunity to develop through challenge. Now, let me just qualify this. I'm not talking about being friends with people that are different and that they are polar opposite of your value system. Inner circle friends have similar values, but maybe different perspectives. We see this in the original design of Adam and Havah, Eve. She is the Ezer Kenegdo in Hebrew, his perfect counterpart. So inner circle relationships should challenge us, should hold us accountable, and move us towards growth. In Ecclesiastes 4:9, Koheleth writes, "Two are better than one, and that their cooperative effort yields this advantage." And then he goes on, and this is the really interesting thing about this text. He goes through many, many things that friendships give us advantages for. And we're going to get into that in our Sabbath Collective membership group next. Friendships are like two-edged swords. So if you could picture here a very sharp two-edged sword. The German philosopher Schopenhauer once said that people are rather like a pack of porcupines on a freezing winter night. The sub-zero temperature forces them together for warmth, but as soon as they press very close, they jab one another and hurt one another, so they separate, only to attempt in vain over and over again to huddle together. Togetherness can be painful, but without it, we will freeze. So these two-edged sword relationships protect us. Now, one side of the sword is support in the battle. This side of the sword that the friend sees you. The friend knows your best self. The friend sees who you've been designed by God to be and fights with you to cut away anything that threatens that. We need someone with us like that, that's our ally. And also, Leonard Sweet said, strength and power comes through complexity, not simplicity. So there's another side to this two-edged sword. The other side of the sword is accountability. Rabbi Abraham Tversky, in his book Visions of the Fathers, writes, the only way to avoid the pitfall of distorted judgment is to enlist the help of an outside person who is not affected by our biases. And that's the other side of that sword. We are as sick as we are secretive. Hidden compartments of the soul and actions without accountability are deadly. And so the friend on this side of the sword cuts out that infectious, ugly part of us that we want to keep hidden. Friendship is a two-edged sword. One side cuts out rejection and isolation. The other side cuts out our endemic drift towards self-deception. Real relationships give the friend permission to cut. C.S. Lewis writes, eros, and eros is the Greek word for that kind of sensual kind of love. Eros will have naked bodies. Friendship, naked personalities. A friend in Hebrew is the word ra. And besides friend, this word also means trouble and shepherd. It's interesting, this word has several meanings. It means friend, it means trouble, and it also means shepherd. The ancient Hebrew pictograph for these are very interesting. And here we can see the word ra'ah for the word for friendship, and we see that it is spelled resh ayin. Now, before there was Hebrew letters, they wrote in pictographs, like so many of the languages did. The letter resh is the picture, the ancient Hebrew pictograph of the head. And it means the head or the leader. And ayin is the eye, or watches and sees. So having a friend is having someone who looks over us, even making sure that if anything goes wrong and he has to make trouble, he will. So having looked at what our sages saw as the motivation for having a friend to challenge us towards growth, let us look more closely at the language used in the Mishnah. So a friend is someone who looks over us, who even makes trouble if it has to happen. The Mishnah instructs us about friends in a very interesting way. And we talked about this earlier. It's the phrase, making friends, kena lecha chaver. The word kena means acquire, and it literally means to buy a friend. To buy a friend? Seems a little weird, right? Lecha means go and get, and the word for friend is chaver, and the root of this word means to tie or to join together by boundaries. So in this phrase, in the Mishnah, kana lecha chaver, there are two concepts here: acquire and buy, and connect and tie together. And the rabbinic meaning of this is that friendship is made and maintained by this dynamic creating and discharging of obligations that creates ties, that makes boundaries around the friends. So wait, forging friendships with ties that bind by creating obligations? That doesn't sound rabbinic or Eastern, does it? It sounds kind of manipulative. Sounds kind of controlling. Like if I give you something to manipulate you, you owe me. But like so many principles in the kingdom economy, we have all seen a perversion of biblical concepts. And here's another example of this. This concept of giving and receiving as a binding relationship is good. And even though it's practiced, it can be practiced in an evil way. Don't let that diminish the authentic practice. In our Western Greek world, we resist anything that ties us to something or someone else, and we call that bondage. But really, what we hate is responsibility, right? But this is the Hebraic way to think. Not all ties are bondage. Greek thinks of ties or responsibility as bondage. Hebraic Eastern thinking is not so much. Not all ties are bondage. The definition of obligated is to be morally bound and have a debt of gratitude. And this is not a negative concept. And neither is to be bound to someone or something in a purposeful relationship. In fact, manipulation and control and bondage couldn't be farther from the point of giving, obligation, and boundaries. So let's look at what happens in this kena lecha chaver of giving and receiving. I give you something, you receive it, and you say thank you very much. And the Hebrew word for thank you is hodah, and it means admit or confess. To be thankful for what you have received and expressing gratitude is to confess a kind of obligation, right? To set boundaries that connect us. And I, the giver, am now invested in you because I gave to you. Do something for someone and you have begun this kana lecha chaver connection. Let me give you an example of this. I knew of a very well-known person who paid for a young person's college tuition. She was a young woman. And now this kind of reciprocal relationship, the student is obligated to produce something good that adds to the world, right? Because she's been invested in. And the investor in the student does more than just write a check. They made calls, they wrote letters because they wanted to see them succeed. They're investing in this person. Both have a tie that makes a boundary, an obligation around the relationship. In this kind of healthy relationship, there is a blessing continuum. And in the rabbinic mind, that's how one acquires a friend. And oftentimes in relationship, this sort of flips back and forth. Who does the giving and who does the receiving? But the investment and the obligation cause both people to watch over each other and be tied together by healthy boundaries to one another. A good example we see of this is the Hasidic tradition about a rope. The Hasidic tradition teaches that friends are bound by a slender silken thread, invisible to the eye, but stronger than the thickest rope. No one can sever the thread except for the person at each end, through a betrayal of trust or an absence in a time of need. But here's the amazing thing in this Hasidic picture. If this thread is cut, if this thread no longer exists because there is a failure of obligation, if these two are separated, it does not mean the end of the relationship. Because in this kind of relationship, there are boundaries and ties that hold these two together. It does not need to be the end. The friend can reconcile. The friend can ask for forgiveness. The friend can work to rebuild trust. And when they do, here's what happens. The friend in this Hasidic tale ties a knot. And in that knot, in this silken thread, this relationship is restored. Now the thread is shorter, isn't it? Because of this disruption, because of this break. But here's the thing, the friends are now closer, aren't they? And that's the picture in this Hasidic tale. That when the two are obligated to one another, connected one another with ties to one another, with ties that bind, times of trouble only cause the two to be closer together. We're going to close this time now with the lighting of the Shabbos candles. And this is, thank you, Ryan, for sharing, encouraging others to feel free to share. Thank you, Ryan. This is a time where traditionally the mothers light the candles, which connects us to Sabbath light of peace and joy and unity. And what she does is light this candle in her home or in places where people gather together to celebrate the Shabbos. And then what she does traditionally is she encircles the candles 3 times with her hands. And this is a gesture that welcomes in the Sabbath. And then she prays as she covers her eyes, and she prays a prayer. Blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the universe, who set us apart by his commandments, who has given us Yeshua the Messiah, and has set us to be a light to the world. Amen. And then everyone usually responds back, the Lord is our light and our salvation. May his light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth